Welcome back to Basin Motorsports. So in an effort to convert the WideFox into a more capable ultimate street car, it's time to get the rear suspension headed in the right direction. Now if you remember back when I first built everything was basically used parts that I used. So I did convert over the 8.8 from the 92 that I had into more like a SN95 with some 97 GT axles, brakes and that. And now it's time to kind of get those lower control arms all fixed up. So today what we're going to do is we're going to install a set of lower control arms in the rear from Maximum Motorsports, and also add in a set of urethane isolators here, both top and bottom. So I said previously in another video that I had planned to go with the 408 Windsor into this, and so I'm really kind of speccing everything for a maximum horsepower of 550 at the engine, really. Now, in order to be competitive in some of these classes, like the Ultimate Street Car from Optima, I had specced out that, or said in a previous video, that I wanted this car capable of around 500 horsepower. Now, you can run into some fuel system limitations running at a 255 liter pump, which is usually or typically good up to about 550 horse at the engine. So in order to do that, you basically have to translate that back out through the transmission, the axles, and everything else. In order to handle that, I've selected the extreme lower control arms from Maximum Motorsports. Now these are a fixed length, obviously there's no adjustment. Also has a sway bar attachment to it and the perches for the springs. So in order to get this started, what I'm going to do is get the WideFox lifted up. I'm going to put the body or the rear half of it on some jack stands for safety, controlling the body. I'm also going to put the rear axle on a set of jack stands to keep it steady. And then I will use my floor jack at that point to be able to lower down the control arms to release the tension on the springs or the compression on the springs and control it as a gradual point. So let's get this thing up. We'll get these tires off. I'll show you kind of what we're going to do to start this. Alright, now let me mention this just because I like safety. If you have any chance your car is going to roll before you take off your tires, or even before you put the first jack stand under it with the jack, make sure you block your front wheels. If it's going to roll when you lift up the rear axle, because usually the transmission or the parking brake is what keeps it from rolling back and forth, by taking that up off the ground, you now have a mobile, basically a dolly, a two-wheel dolly. So block your front wheels if your car is going to roll at all, or if you have any chance. Alright, now before I go ahead and start loosening the control arms to take them off, first thing I want to do is take off my sway bar, because I do have a sway bar attached to those. There's 2 bolts on each side, on each control arm, left and right, that I want to take those off first. Control arm here, obviously the coil spring here, control arm, parking brake, and I'm going to take these 2 bolts out. Now these thread into the sway bar itself, so just take these out with a socket and ratchet. Take these out, and then just remember, these are on a little bit of tension, so take out one and then take out the other, and be prepared, it's going to kind of spring a little bit. If you're worried about it, take like a zip tie, and you can zip tie around your control arm, and that way it keeps it from springing down too fast. It controls it there, and then you can take off the other side. Alright, so now it's time to take apart your control arm. So the sway bar, you can see, is out. I've already taken it out and I set it aside so it's not in the way. Your control arm has 2 connection points. One is going to be this nut and bolt here. I've already taken the nut off. The other is going to be this front piece right here. There's a nut and bolt. The bolt goes up inside this pocket. The nut goes on the inside. Now, your jack is going to come up right below the spring. So your jack is going to come up here, and you're going to put a little bit of tension up, pushing this up. And the only reason is you want to be able to take this out nice and easy without having to drive it out. Right now, the spring is pushing down on this control arm just a little bit, which is keeping this bolt in. So if I bring my jack in, I raise it up directly below the spring. I take just a little bit of the tension off of this bolt. I can take this bolt off, and now I can let my jack down. And remember, These things are compressed at this point, so they're going to expand down, lower it down nice and safely, and once you have it down low enough, this spring will then come out, and then you can work on taking out the front bolt on your front control arm. Alright, so once you have your lower control arm lowered down to a certain point, slowly doing it, your spring is going to become loose. So you can, at that point, just go ahead and pull it out, and then you can go ahead and up into this pocket here and take out your nut and bolt there to be able to get the front arm out. Alright, we'll kind of show you what we're replacing here. So this is what came out. Now, this is the factory mount, and I don't even remember if these are from the 80 or the 92. I think they're from the 80. So you can kind of see these bushings have had it. They're they're in bad shape. So we're going to replace these. Obviously, this led to a lot of that clunking I showed you guys. If you ever heard in-car stuff, they're clunky, but I showed you on the 2020 Vision video where I rocked the car back and forth, and it was like, and this is part of it. These bushings are wore out. So we're going to replace these now and get ready to assemble the Maximum Motorsports pieces. Working on the driver's side control arm. So the way this is set up is the logo goes to the outside of the car. Spring perch obviously goes to the rear towards the axle. And then your sway bar mount goes also towards the front. Inside the kit are 4 of the urethane bushings, I guess you'd call them there. So we get 2 of those go on the back, 2 of those go on the front. There are 2 grease capsules here. There are grease packages that comes with it. So one per control arm. The spacer goes on the passenger side, so I'll show you that in a little bit. And then these fasteners here are what go on your sway bar. So grab 4 of those, lube them up on all surfaces, put them in there, and then we're going to reassemble them. Now I've switched over to some nitro gloves. That way I don't get the grease all over my fingers. You guys may just want to do that, and then you can always take these off or just use them to assemble stuff. But we'll go ahead and do that. Lubricate those up, put them in, and then I'm going to loosely assemble everything back together. A couple things to note. Put the grease on this side here, this face, and in this groove here. Now you don't have to do a lot of it. Make sure it's just coated nicely there, but you don't want to, when you push this on, you don't want a ton of squeeze out around this. It's just extra, it just gets everywhere else. Now these isolators, these are brand new. Urethane ones going on. Now they are going to fit very tight, and it's going to be hard to squeeze them this way. So in order to do that, take your control arm and put it assembly there and put it on the ground and use pushing down this way. It'll take some force, but they're going to pop on there, and then you're not going to have to worry about them. So just take your time, turn them upside down, use gravity and your body weight, kind of smash them together there, and that way it's going to fit. And then this thing, whoo, it's on there. So once these are all assembled there, you can take your arms, start reassembling. Again, it's going to take a little bit of effort. You're going to push them up into the body, put the bolt through, and then tighten the nut down, finger tight, and then you can put your spring back on and put that in the way. Now remember, on the bottom of your springs, you're going to have a pigtail. Now this pigtail, when you orient it, on both control arms needs to go to the driver's side. So if you're imagining that this is the car, if this is the axle, and this is the front of the car here in the sway bar, this pigtail, when I look at it, should be looking directly at me. It should be directly perpendicular to the car, running parallel with the axle, so cross car, and it needs to be facing outboard. So face the driver's side, so this will go on like this, and then when I tighten it up, it'll go everything in. Alright, so before you put your arms in, make sure all your surfaces are clean. Just use some fine sandpaper. You can use something just to rough this up. It really is just to make sure that this surface on all sides, both sides of the axle, and then under both sides of the car, make sure that those are cleaned out. You can use some sandpaper, whatever you want to do, but make sure the surfaces are clean. That way the bushings aren't going to wear funny, and they'll get a nice good grip to the axle itself. Here is the lower control installed. I just finger tight on the bolts. But just remember, the front end's going to go in easy. This back end's going to go in a little difficult. That's because you're also trying to fight a side-to-side condition plus an up-down. Now you remember, this is the first date between all your parts. So it's going to be awkward. It's going to be hard to do. But just take some time with it. If you get a little squeeze out around your bushings and that up in here, don't worry about it. It'll wipe off at the end. So it looks good up in there. Nice, fresh bushings up. strong piece there. So now it's time to tackle the passenger side. Just one note, the Maximum Motorsports instructions that come with the lower control arms, they say to do the passenger side first. Now I am just kind of like, whatever, but they do say passenger side, so if you want to follow their directions to the letter, start with the passenger sides first, but it's going to be the same process as I just showed you on the driver's side. Same installation, take out, reinstall, and everything else. Once I have the passenger side done, I'll then show you how to put on the sway bar, and then we can work on tightening up the bolts to the correct torque. So with both arms, you can see on there loosely installed, before I install the sway bar, I'm going to torque them down. Now if you notice underneath the subframe connectors, I've taken out the jack stands there, and I'm only supporting the axle. Now what this does is it allows the car to be in laden condition, meaning all the weight of the car is on the suspension, on the springs. Now by doing this and torquing down the bolts, you're going to apply torque to the nut itself, not the bolt head, but the nut. And we're going to torque these doing the front first on each side and then doing the rears. Now these are going to be done in 86 foot-pounds, front and rear. And the reason you want to do this, at least in the laden condition where all the weight is on the suspension, means it's going to be an approximate ride height. Now urethane bushings themselves aren't so bad, but what happens if the control arm has a bushing that's mounted to it or glued to it? If you put it in a non-laden condition, let's say you forget to take the jack stands out and tighten it down, what it does is it tends to push them in a bind. So when it rotates down, and it basically puts a lot of torque on the bushing itself and causes a lot of premature wear. Now urethane bushings and that are not connected, where I installed them later plus some grease, not so particular on that, but I think it's great habit if you install everything always in laden condition, meaning the weight is on the suspension. So once here, we're going to install this front first, torque the nut, not the bolt head, 86 foot-pounds both sides, and then I'll do the rears. So your arms are done. Next is going to be the sway bar. Now the sway bar comes with some clips, so these actually slide off. And notice they've got just a little bit of a lip right there. So just kind of take a flat blade screwdriver, pry up on the outside here, pry this out, and then pop these off. Now once your sway bar is going to go back on your arms, the arms are going to be on the outside of your sway bar out here. So this bolt is going to go from the outside of the sway bar, or outside of the arm, I'm sorry, through the arm, through the sway bar, and then you're going to do a washer and a nut. Now I'm going to start only the driver's side. The passenger side may or may not use this spacer. So I'm going to go over there and show you how to use this and double check it, and we'll see if we need it or not. You have your sway bar positioned in place. You have the bolts in here. Now these are just loosely in, there's not a nut on the side. You're going to take your sway bar and you're going to push it all the way to the driver's side. Now what you want to check for is between the control arm here and the sway bar, you want to see if this spacer is going to fit. Now obviously mine is definitely going to fit in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install this in between the sway bar and the control arm. Take one bolt out at a time, install it in, and then I'll tighten it down there. Now these are going to go down to 46 foot-pounds on each one. Again, drive the nut, not the bolt, and torque everything down. Alright, now with everything tightened up completely, 86 foot-pounds on the front and back half of the lower control arms. The sway bar is at 45. I think I said 46, so 45, 46, 45 in the instructions. Now at this point, I actually had to loosen my exhaust to get the bolt out on the front chassis side inboard, so I tightened my exhaust back up. And then at this point, I've gone over everything. So take a minute, take a deep breath, because you're done. You're pretty much done. But get a flashlight, look through everything, make sure everything you've taken loose, you've already retightened, torqued everything properly, and then also just go through your instructions. Maximum Motorsports does have some good instructions now. So go over those step by step, looking through there. Now, on the SN95 cars, these parts will fit those, but they actually have some ABS rings and some other stuff on there that I don't have on mine. So there are some steps in the instructions to do some ABS work, moving park brake cable and some other stuff. On mine, I don't have to do that, so I skipped over it. So if you've got an SM95 car, you'll at least have some extra work. Now from this point, I need to put the wheel on, basically tighten the lug nuts down and set it down on the ground, torque the lug nuts, and then, well, we're going to be done. All right, so with the car back on the ground now, everything's torqued, I'm done. Now the instructions do say it takes approximately 4 to 5 hours using basic hand tools in your garage like I did. Now I will agree with that. Probably, I'd say 5 hours is a good number, especially when I'm filming that. So, professional shop could probably cut that down with a lift and some other stuff. They might get it down around the 2-hour range. It's not so bad though, with basic hand tools and that. So just be patient with it. Like I said, everything, trying to marry everything up in the first date of everything, it's going to take a little bit of time, a little bit of wiggling, jiggling, and all that stuff to kind of get everything set. And now in the instructions, they do say the first 100 to 200 miles, it's going to ride stiffer as everything kind of gets broke in and gets cycled and that. So be expected of that. The first couple 100 miles, you might think that you have some stiffer springs in the back, and really it's just those old worn out bushings have now changed to some really solid urethane bushings, both in the springs, because I did the isolators, and with the lower control arm. So I'm not going to go drive it today. I'm going to save that for another trip, but I'll show that in a later video. Basically, let's see. Oh, I can barely move it now. So you can imagine when I did the 2020 and you hear it rocking, it's like clack, 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 clack. Well, this really isn't rocking anymore. Still a little bit left with the uppers, but we'll take care of that another time. So that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed this, watching it. Thanks for watching, liking, subscribing, and with that, we'll see you next time.